This podcast is brought to you by Infinite Resources, a local staffing agency connecting diverse job candidates in central Iowa companies.
Hey, thanks for joining us again for my third episode of The Roads Taken. It's a podcast where I interview people to try and figure out some of the lessons learned that they have learned either through their childhood, that K-12 experience that's formative for us, or that military, if they were part of the military, or that career phase of their life where a lot of people my age are currently in. And take it from somebody that's learning a lot of those lessons. You learn a lot more later in life than you ever anticipated. So today's guest, is Joel Lundstrom, somebody I've known for, let's see, 23 plus 5, that's 28. I can still do math. So I've known him for 28 plus years. I think the first year that he knew me as a knucklehead. So hopefully I've surpassed that image. But I have him on because I've been working with him for a little while, and I think he has a lot of insight into some of the challenges that happen post-college in your career site. So, Joel, thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks for having me. And you were a knucklehead for sure, but I think I probably was too, so that seems fair.
Yeah, the problem with me is that I was very hard to hide it.
Yes.
You had that outer facade that people liked you, and you were a good kid.
I had people looking out for me and covered up.
Yes.
Yeah, that's what it was.
That's the problem. I figured that out later. So, Joel, how do we know each other? Let's back up. Tell us where you grew up, where you're born,
Sure.
those type of things.
So I grew up in Perry and had a great experience growing up. Perry's a small town, and that's how we met in high school, and just a great experience growing up in a small town. And small towns feel safe. You know everybody looks out for you.
Right.
And, it just had a great experience growing up there.
And you basically from preschool through, or I guess it probably was kindergarten back then,
all
through
the way
high school, right?
Yep, went to a small Catholic school all the way through 8th grade, and then went to the public school, which was a big leap back then because getting to know new kids, new faces, and just had a really good experience growing up in Perry.
And I think that's one of the things you and I have in common, that we like the small town atmosphere, and a lot of it's because of that. I have friends that tell me they move out to the big city, and for probably very good reasons. But one of the lessons learned I've since coming to Perry is life in a small town has its benefits, and one of them is that community that is out looking out for you, or in your case, your kids, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think small towns offer a lot of things, and they're lacking in some other areas, but the community feel, and you're very active in Perry, as you know, and when you volunteer for organizations and you're part of different groups, you get to know everybody, and it feels like the community always gives back to you a lot. And my kids both have special needs, and we had a very safe, fun experience growing up in a small town, and we thought with our kids' special needs and letting the entire community know them and being a part of that, we thought that was a great way to raise them, and so we were excited to be able to grow up or raise them in a small town.
Yeah, and I wish more people knew that because the city life is awesome. I like. We might go out after this.
Yes, for
The
sure.
city life is great, but people need to understand there's some the lessons I've learned is small town living has its benefits.
Yeah, absolutely.
So speaking of your kids, you have some amazing kids. I love keeping up with them through Kristen's social media. What are some of the lessons that you learned that maybe you've used to teach your kids as because they're older now, so you've raised them pretty much near to adulthood, at least the first one, and the other one's a freshman, I think, right?
Yes, yep.
So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, they still smell like teenagers, so that's why I don't think they're necessarily in adulthood yet. But no, we've had a really good experience raising them in Carroll, and before that in Manhattan, Kansas, which would have been a little smaller or a larger city. But even then, you build a small support group that's around you, especially with kids with special needs. But it's fun to interact. My kids are incredibly positive and upbeat and excited all the time, and I call them day makers because they make everybody's day. And when they're around them and people meet with them in the community, they're just positive and upbeat. And they've had high school friends that get in trouble from time and make bad decisions, but then you see them interact with my kids, and these same kids that get in trouble a lot, you see the best part of their characters come out and how they treat my sons.
So I know you and Kristen are humble in your parenting, but this is a podcast to help people. So what are some of the things that you think you've done right in raising them? Because, yeah, they're amazing kids, and they've had their challenges, and in another world, they may not have been day makers. They may not have made people feel as special when they interacted with them. What do you think are some of the things that you guys have focused on?
So I think one thing we've done is always fought for a little bit of advocacy and then also inclusion and playing sports for them. We put them on regular teams. They got to play sports. They got to be around other kids. It's scary as a person with kids with disability. You're never sure how the other kids are going to react to them. You're not sure how other fan bases will react if they get on the floor or in the field. But I can tell you we've had nothing but positive experiences with that. Almost across the board, everybody treats them well and interacts with them positively. And I think us putting them out there a lot in that community sense was great. I think that's part of the reason why they've enjoyed their lives so much and made our lives better.
So you're an advocate for youth sports and activities for all kids.
Yeah, absolutely.
It sounds like
yeah.
it. So unfortunately for me, I was not in organized sports, and I loved sports, and I played a lot of sports. In fact, I might have beat you a few times when we were growing up.
I don't remember one time. I have no idea what
I'm
you're talking about.
pretty sure I might have
Yes,
dunked on you at
that.
one point.
Yeah.
But one of the things I've realized now as I'm coaching my kids and seeing like legit youth coaches showing like techniques on form and all these things, X's and O's stuff, I'm like, wow, I wish I would have had that. I wish I would have been involved in youth sports and high school sports. And I know you were.
Yeah.
So in multiple sports. Maybe you can talk about what you were involved in. But what I'm curious to know is, what are some of the things that you gained from playing sports?
Yeah, I did, basketball, football, track, and youth baseball, and really had a good experience playing sports. We won very, very little, as you can imagine. But we definitely enjoyed our experience, and I felt like I learned a lot about, leadership, working with others, a little bit of tenacity, and but also, there's a lot of other things I've learned. As we mentioned my boys earlier, I've learned from watching them play sports and how kind people can be and how sports aren't always everything, too, at the same time. And sometimes we take each moment too serious, and I think I spoiled a little bit of my own sports experiences by taking them a little bit too serious at times and was too harsh on myself or on teammates, and seeing the lighter side of sports and what my boys have brought to the table, which is that it's fun being part of the team. You miss that part. I think with you being in the military, I'm sure you experienced that where you never get that camaraderie back. You never get that, teasing and heckling between friends, and you miss that. And that's you didn't realize how great it was when you're doing it, but I'm sure as you've left the military, you feel like it's something you miss in your life for sure.
And it's hard to find.
Yeah.
It's hard to find outside. We'll get to careers here in a second, but especially like in the workforce, it's hard to find unless you're in the right place or you really work. It's hard to find that camaraderie. So you talked about leadership, tenacity, some of the things you learned as sports. Can you talk more about that leadership piece? Because I think leadership is one of the difference makers in career trajectories, I would say. Can you think of how sports helped you in the leadership piece?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I was very often in most of the sports I played the leader, but I also knew I had a role to play a lot of times, and you're excited to do that and part of it. And but the challenges of bringing the best out of other people is what you do in organizations. You do the same thing on a sports team. Is you try to figure out how do I best bring out somebody's best character, get their best work ethic. How do I get them to perform the best? It's the same things you're trying to do in the workplace.
So for those of you that know you are pretty tenacious, and the amount of prep work we put into some of this is kind of speaks to you. You're detail oriented. You want to get things right, but like a lot of that, I feel like is intrinsic. You somehow have it in you from your upbringing. I don't know where it came from, but not everybody has it. And you saw that in sports, I'm sure, where people are not as tenacious. They don't work. Can you remember any things that you learned on how to, or you bring that out of people, like that grit or work ethic in the sports arena?
Yeah, I don't. my parents have always been hard workers. I feel like it's something that's been socially modeled for me, something you learn by observing others. And so most of the people I've been around have been hard workers and tenacious. And but you also build certain idols, right? And how they perform things. And when you see somebody that you want to model or somebody you want to emulate, and some of our favorite movies are a little bit of fiction with like Rudy and things like that, but you love those kind of characters and you idealize them, and it's just something you want to do, as you get older as a professional too.
Right.
So.
And that's really, I think, what separates a lot of people, that tenacity. Just life gets challenging sometimes. Speaking of challenges, you went to UNI Panthers, then you went to the Kansas State Wildcats, if I remember the mascot right. You got a 3.75 GPA for your bachelor's degree, a 3.88 for your master's degree, a 3.89 for your PhD. When are you going to get that 4.0? And how many more degrees is it going to take?
It would definitely take a couple more degrees for sure. So, no, I had great experiences at UNI. I loved being at Kansas State, and I already had all the purple gear when I went to UNI. So going to grad school and Kansas State and wearing more purple was great, and had a good experience there. I had great professors, and grad school is kind of it feels like a leap at times. It's a challenge, and I really enjoyed my experience there too.
And the numbers would indicate you're prepared for college, but I'll still ask it. Did you feel prepared, or what did you have to do to get that success?
Yeah, we've talked about that before with Perry High, and some of the teachers were tough, and they really did prepare you extremely well. But, I think like most people, when I got to UNI, and especially when I got to graduate school, I was in a PhD program, and a lot of them already had master's degrees and came from really, really good private schools. And most of their parents were either doctors or lawyers or professors, and they had PhDs. And so you feel a little intimidated, and you feel like you don't belong. And I know we talk a lot about in our field imposter syndrome and people feeling like they don't belong and feeling inadequate, and you definitely have those feelings. Some of the best advice I ever got for graduate school was somebody told me work incredibly hard that first semester. If you establish yourself as one of the top students in the cohort and the group, the word spreads really, really quickly. They'll give you good teaching assignments. They'll give you oftentimes other grant opportunities to work on, and I got a number of those too. And I think I went to grad school with a number of really, really bright people, and when I say that, I think and the entire group was all more intelligent than I was, and so I think that did pay off. I think working hard early on in those experiences was very beneficial.
It reminds me of this that phrase, first impressions matter, or you can't do a first impression twice. I can't remember where it goes, but like sometimes I feel like people tell us, don't be too judgy. We shouldn't be too judgy. But in the back of my mind, I'm like, that's the world we live in, and that first impression you make is going to kind of lay the foundation for you. So it sounds like that's kind of what you were trying to do. You were trying to get that first impression of you're going to do well, you're going to be a hard worker, and pay it off in the long run.
Yeah, and I think, I'm not as polished as a lot of speakers. I'm not as polished as a lot of writers, and I think for me, it was trying to anchor a first impression that they could gravitate to. That, and I did that as a strategy. I worked incredibly hard. That first semester, and after that, I had great grad experience.
And so, did your that imposter syndrome that you may have felt early, did that change as you started seeing success in your, from your bachelor's to your master's to your PhD, or do you still have that, or how does that change that self-efficacy piece?
I think every time I walked into a new world, a new environment, I started from scratch with that. I think, to a certain extent, maybe you do build up that I've done something before that I didn't think I could do, but you still feel like maybe this isn't the level I belong at. And so I do think that's a challenge for people. And you probably I don't know that I'll ever get over that going into, if I take on additional roles or more responsibilities, I'm sure I'll feel that again.
But okay, and that seems almost daunting, isn't that seems like a heavy burden. So when let's go back to your last degree, you felt that imposter syndrome or maybe that doubt early on. As you progressed through that program, did you feel more confident or
Yeah, for
even in
sure.
your career?
Yeah.
Do you there has to be a point where you start feeling, all right, I do belong in this
Yeah,
place.
I think so. Success makes you feel more confident. You're building that up over time, and you're adding more self-efficacy and feeling like you can do certain things. And absolutely, I feel like that's something that does build up over time. But like you make the next leap, it's oftentimes a challenge.
And that's why I like the phrase or the word tenacity, because that imposter syndrome takes out so many people.
Yeah.
Like that they just don't feel like they belong, and so they need to be tenacious to get over
Yeah.
that first
Yeah.
piece of that, whatever that is,
Yeah.
a degree or job, and then oftentimes you figure it out.
Yeah, I had that at UNI as well. I remember my very first psychology class that I ever took at UNI is 330 people in the room. You're kind of intimidated. You're a skinny freshman on your way to becoming a chubby freshman, and you're just never really confident that you belong in that room. And I remember the first test I got back was a C-, my lowest grade I'd ever received. And I thought, wow, this is really, really unfair teacher. And I looked over to the kid next to me, and he had an A- on his exam. And he was somebody I couldn't believe that he was doing better than me. And one day I ran into him in between class, and he was going to the library. And it turns out there's a building on our campus that was called the library. It must have been on the tour, but I missed that.
Yeah.
And that was a really awesome experience to see that I didn't think kids studied in college. I had seen Animal House way too many times. That was going to be my experience. And see him go to the library in the middle of the day when he didn't even have a test to do really changed my viewpoint on it. So I decided at that point it would be good to buy the book for the class because I hadn't purchased that yet. And the next test, I got a D on it. And that was the wake-up call that I needed because I still hadn't studied.
But you had the book.
I had the book, which is great, and osmosis of sleeping on it every night didn't work. And so at that point, what I did was I remember looking through the thing, and if I got nearly every question right on all the rest of the exams, he would throw out the lowest exam. And if I did that, I could still get an A in the class. And that's the part where you talk about sometimes you feel like you don't belong, and I had that decision to make. Do I feel like I don't belong? But luckily, I had the kid next to me that I didn't think was particularly bright, outperforming me.
Yeah.
And I thought I could do at least as good as he did if I studied like he did. And sure enough, I got them all right on the next exam and studied my tail off for that entire semester. Never worked harder on anything in my life. Read that book cover to cover, submitted all the homework. And on the final, I had to go into a cumulative final and get every single question right to get an A in the class. I could miss one. And I got every single question right on the cumulative final and studied my tail off. And then never really sure what major I wanted at the time. But when you study that hard for Gen Psych, you were well prepared to be a psych major.
Nice.
And so that's literally how I chose my psych major is I knew so much from my one or two failures at Gen Psych in that early part of the semester kind of catapulted me into some other successes there.
Man, you should thank whoever was sitting next to you.
I know. I do not remember the kid's name. He was in college. We always called him Hey Friends. You'd see him around campus. You'd say Hey because you knew each other, but you weren't really hanging out very often. But he went to the library every single day, and I started doing that. And that was the technique that I used. I went to the library every day. If I had a test or not, I would go in between classes. I never wanted to study at night. I wanted to enjoy the social aspects of college, and I sure did. And But studying every day for a couple hours, it's amazing how prepared you are going into a test.
Nice. So speaking of psych, that ended up starting your path towards the psych degrees. Help me out with the last two degrees. What organizational?
Yep. So I went to Kansas State and got a master's and PhD in industrial organizational psychology, which is kind of a fancy way to say psychology as applies to the workplace. And so in psych, you study, we call it IO psych. So in IO psych, you study personnel selection, leadership training, ethics, performance appraisal, how do you select employees, all the decisions that involve business, and all the psychological biases that go into it, all the decisions you have to make, all the leadership theories that have been studied, and workplace motivation is a big topic, and org psych that I love studying. All those things I think were great, catapult to any career, let alone a career in education. So,
and I didn't even know those things existed, but now that I'm thinking about pursuing another degree, I'm like, man, that might be a good degree to pursue, because it seems to me that that's impacted your career and some of your successes, maybe some of your challenges, or how to get through them. Can you talk about how some of that learning in psychology from general psych, but especially the organizational piece, has helped you navigate the world of leadership in organizations?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, when you're studying organizations objectively and scientifically, or at least around people that are doing it well, and you're picking up a lot of good theories and a lot of good ideas for what you'd like to implement someday as a manager or leader. And I felt like that was a great experience doing that. One thing that I remember, though, is the very first time I got to teach general psychology. So I'd been in IO Psych and got some graduate credits, and I was starting to teach Gen Psych for undergrads. All of a sudden, all those theories also matter more in adulthood than they did when I was 18, and learning how to interact with people. And, you and I were talking about in-group and out-group biases and stuff that people have, and all of these things. I thought it was a great, and then I went on to teach social psychology, which is a great class for just life lessons and leadership. And one of the other pieces that I remember, classes I picked up that I wasn't prepared to teach, but as a graduate student at Kansas State, they needed somebody to teach it, was problem-solving and decision-making. So we got to learn about all these biases people make and how they make bad decisions, and how do you make good decisions, and how do you avoid things like groupthink and other decision-making things. And I love studying that, and not particularly in my area, not something that was going to be in my dissertation or anything, but something that I think has served me well, learning those theories.
Yeah, and it's something that I feel like is giving you, I'm sure you've had your challenges, but it's giving you kind of a roadmap to navigate through the challenges of leadership, I'll call it that. What were some of those early challenges? Because when I was looking up your resume, I'm like, golly, you've been in leadership for some time.
Yeah.
You've been, you're only a year older than me, but you've been in some administrative positions for some time. So do you remember some of those early challenges you had? Because you must have been a pretty young leader, leading some older folks. What were some of those challenges, and how did some of that learning help you? I
remember the very first class I taught, they told me that you're the youngest person in the room. And the person pointed out right away, which is kind of intimidating when you think about it. But I had great mentors, and mentors that thought I had something to offer, and were kind to me, and they're willing to spend extra time to me. And one of the jobs I'd taken was at Fort Riley, Kansas, at community college there that was on the base. And my mentor is a former Lieutenant Colonel, Win Butler, and he took his opportunity to mentor me and help put me in leadership roles. It gave me really good opportunities at a younger age. But at the same time, people don't really cut you any slack, right? Like, they want to know their leaders. What age you are hardly matters. They want to know that you're somebody that they respect and that you have their back. And anytime you get a new leader, you want to know, can I trust them, and do you care about me, right? And I remember hearing that in your conversation before, and that just is something that people sometimes forget. And I think that's the age thing didn't really matter as much.
Yeah, that's a huge point. Especially coming from a military background, I think that kindness piece sometimes gets forgotten, but it goes a long ways. And you learned it from a military guy, so that's kind of cool. So you talked about mentorship. I think that's huge, especially for people with our background that don't have a lot of folks in our family that have that level of leadership responsibility. Can you talk about how this gentleman became your mentor? Did you seek him out? Did he seek you out? Was it kind of a accident? But more importantly, how would you recommend people find mentors?
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I've had great mentors all the way growing up, from people that like Tom Lipovac, and one of my first jobs was working for a detasseling crew. So I used to drive a school bus when I was 19 years old, driving a school bus of kids detasseling corn and working in the fields, and had a great mentor there with Ken Dinger, and he had managed the crews, and he was the first one that kind of taught me servant leadership, because he'd come out in the field, and I'm 19 years old, and he'd say, "What do you need me to do, Mr. Lundstrom?" And I'd be like, "Well, we've got 20 kids in the crew today. I've got 6 rows left. I don't think it's worth putting the kids through the row. Can you pull the last 6 rows?" He'd look at it and say, "I'm going to take 2 hours to do that. I'll meet you back in the town later." And, he was willing to do whatever I needed him to do the task. And way before servant leadership was probably a term that was even coined, he's somebody that taught me that. And, particularly my experiences in my career, I think I had people looking out for me that appreciated me or appreciated my work ethic, or just you had some commonality with. And I encourage people to reach out to mentors, find people that they see value in, and the relationships all look different, right? It could be somebody you've worked with for 10 years, or it could be somebody that you've known for 10 minutes, but seeing value in what you can pull out of them or with their experience, I think is important.
And that's the part that I think a lot of people struggle with, because especially knowing your background and who you are and knowing who I am, sometimes I don't want to feel disingenuous finding, hey, I'm gonna seek you out for you to be my mentor for this. So, but it's not really that, right? It's not like we're trying to take advantage of people. It's a lot of people I found out want to be mentors, and they find value in helping people like you and I. What are some of your experiences in like reaching out to mentors, and how do you do it in a way that's not transactional, in a way that's like, look, I want to learn, and I see some skills in you. How do you do that for people, with people?
Yeah, I remember one of the first experiences was at UNI, and I had a professor that I thought was an incredible teacher, and he had a degree in industrial organizational psychology, and that was the first org psych class I took. And I remember walking the hallways outside his office because I wanted to learn more about what he did. He was a business consultant, and I thought that sounded like a really cool career field. And I remember walking past his door numerous times before I had the courage to say anything to him, because he was an intimidating figure to me. And I finally did knock on the door, walked in. I said, I'm interested in what you do, and you had great stories today, and I just want to learn how could I possibly do that, and what would it look like? He said, well, you need a degree. You need a grad degree. And I said, well, I don't know anything about graduate school. I've never had anybody in my family go to graduate school. He goes, well, you need to take this test, and here's what you need to do. Here's the schools you should apply to, and just took a lot of time to. And one of the things he said is, what's your application look like? What are the things you do academically? And I had a pretty short list at the time. And he said, well, you need to be a TA. And I said, well, how do I become a TA, a teacher's assistant for a class? I'm just an undergrad. That's not pretty common, or wasn't common at UNI. And he goes, well, you need to be a TA. He goes, come with me. He walked me across the hall, and he said, Dr. Gasser, do you have a research methods TA for next year or next semester already? He goes, yep, I already do. And he goes, that's okay. You can take 2, right? And he goes, well, I don't really need a second one. He goes, oh, no, but this is Joel Lundstrom. He's an undergrad, but we really need him in the field. We want to give him this experience, and he really needs to be in the field. And that was 15 minutes out of his day, but it literally has changed the next,
That's crazy.
Days of my life for sure. And take that time and encourage me was something that I think a good mentor would do for you.
And it reminds me of this, just what I've known, that it's not often, sometimes it's not what you know, it's who you know, and like people opening doors for you, and people with certain backgrounds, let's say you and I, mine, we just need more doors open, because those doors are not opened by the people that are in our immediate family. Yeah. So
and
that's huge.
Yeah, and you take a small step and knock on his door and ask him a question, and it changes a career path for me. So
that's crazy. I didn't know that part.
Yeah.
So you've been in leadership, I can't remember how many years, but it's got to be at least a couple decades. Yeah. Can you think about some of the most important lessons you've learned through some of the battle wounds, or some of those crazy things that happen when you go into leadership?
Yeah. I think one of the things I learned is when you lead groups or lead people, and I don't know that I always do this well, but you got to like everybody. There's something likable about everybody. Once you get to know their story, everyone's likable, right? And you want to learn more about them and find out what their passions are. And I remember we all have colleagues that sometimes everybody knows is the difficult one to work with. And I've seen in every place I've worked, and when you work with people long enough and you really seek it out, you eventually see what they're truly passionate about. A lot of them might hate their job and they might be tough to work with, but they love working with their kids, and they love you telling you stories about what their kids have accomplished and what they've gone on to do. They love, some of them love their sports or their sports teams, and having an interaction with that, and finding what they're passionate about, it really brings out the best in them. And so that's what you should be seeking out when you look at people.
And I've seen you do a pretty good job of remembering those things about people, because you meet tons of people, but somehow you remember those pieces. So that's an area that I think I need to grow in, because I do that with the people that I interact with regularly. But I think a lot of us just need to be more intentional, maybe that's the right word, of doing it with everybody.
Yeah.
So if you had to go,
I think I need to do it too. I don't think that's something that I do well. I think it's something I need to always work on too.
yeah,
So.
yeah. I just think you have experience, and maybe the psychology piece in your background helps you, but you do a pretty good job, I would say. But I get your point. You could probably do better.
Yeah, I always feel like I could do better on that for sure.
So let's go back to pre master's degree, like before you got into leadership.
Yeah.
If you went back, or maybe you want to talk to a new leader, somebody that's going into a management position, whatever type of organization, what are some of the things you would give them some as suggestions? What are some of the things that might help them be more successful as leaders?
Yeah, I think they want to, take the time with the people to get to know them, know their situation. I think I had a friend one time tell me that the golden rule was wrong, and that what it should say is you should treat others as they want to be treated. And I think that's something to think about, because I have this bias, like we all do, that I think everybody's like me and their motivations are the same. And I'm not somebody that likes necessarily attention or pats on the back always, and I don't feel like I like having a lot of autonomy. But sometimes I forget when you're in a leadership role that some people don't want tons of autonomy. They don't want that level of responsibility. They want your guidance and help and support. And that's where I struggle sometimes, is to forget not everybody approaches it how I would approach it. So.
Yeah, and some people do want that high five and
Yep.
that pat in the back, and and it goes back to your point earlier, getting to know people
Yep.
and what drives them. I like the personality test for that reason.
Yep.
It's a bit of a shortcut to get to know people,
Yeah.
because really deep down you get to know them if you interact with them.
Yep.
But that's one reason I like those personality tests, to figure out. I've done it with my kids actually,
Yeah.
where even though they're my kids and I should know them in and out,
Yeah.
like I give them the love language test,
Awesome.
and they
Yeah.
took it, and I'm like, oh, that confirms this kid likes that, that kid likes that.
Yeah.
So I think that can be expanded to the workforce.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
leadership.
And I think we all get busy at the workplace, and so you don't always have opportunities to do that, and seeking those out and figuring out where those are. But I feel like I've get to know people if you see them socially, if you see how they are around their families and around their kids and what those dynamics are. One of my favorite things to do is when employees bring parents by the office to meet me. And there's nothing more fun than meeting somebody you've worked with for a lot of years and meeting their family, meet their parents, and all of a sudden you have this great insight into who they are, right? And if the person's particularly sarcastic, you'll see that out in their parents. If you speech patterns and sometimes demeanor, and I think that's fun to see where they come from, and that's a lot of fun.
And I don't think you realize this, but when you talk, it makes me wonder how much more I would be in tune to these things if I had psychology degrees, because that definitely comes. You analyze things deeper, I would say, than somebody with a political science degree.
No,
I'm really stuck on Ukraine and Hamas and Gaza. That's what I'm into nowadays. But that's insightful.
One of the things I did, though, because I do like those topics and I like studying psychology, and I like some of the things that brings to the table, is when I was in my early 20s, I had a 30-minute commute to work, and spent a lot of time in the car. And luckily, I had an old enough car that still had a tape deck. And at the time, you could check out books on tape from Cracker Barrel, and they're free or really cheap or something. And then I remember one of the first ones it was a Zig Ziglar book on tape, motivation stuff,
okay.
and he's a motivational guy. And you listen to it, and one of the first things he said is, if you've got a 2-hour commute, or if you got a 30-minute commute, and you listen to audiobooks, you can get an equivalent of a master's degree in 2 years. And I thought, there's no way that's true, but that doesn't really matter. I'm sure I'd be smarter than I am today. And so I went on eBay at the time and bought all these dollar Tony Robbins books and things like that. And I think for a period of time in my life, at least in that period, that made me really seek out a lot of positive things, upbeat things that were good. I think what you daily consume sometimes does influence you. And I'm trying to delete my TikTok and those types of things, because that breeds a lot of negativity too. And I think that's a problem that we all have sometimes.
And delete certain people, because not just what you
absolutely.
consume, but who you surround yourself.
Yes, for sure.
I've realized that for sure. So psychology has helped you in leadership in your career and a bunch of other areas, I'm sure, but probably where I'm thinking it's helped you the most is poker.
Yeah.
How much money do you attribute to all those degrees that you have in winning at the poker table?
Yeah, no, I can win at the poker table sometimes, not all the time, right? And so when you get those experiences, they're a lot of fun. But a lot of poker players today they're really, really interesting people. And the primary reason why I like playing poker is because there's a strategy behind it. And I love strategizing. And then I also like the aspect of meeting people that you would normally interact with. And I've met really interesting people from all over the world. And when I find out they have an interesting career that's not like mine, I'll talk their ear off. I remember one time in Vegas meeting a guy that was a concrete contractor. And I said, well, how did you get into that? And he goes, well, my office tried to spend $300,000 on concrete, and I thought that was too much. So I said, I could be a concrete contractor. And I said, had you ever poured concrete before? And he goes, no, I just went out and started getting bids. And he bid out, and he's a multimillionaire fascinating people that you get to meet. And so I've always enjoyed that part. The psychology part, most poker players play with like a game theory optimal strategy that they don't pay attention to tells anymore. They don't pay attention to the motivations built into how they play certain hands in certain situations. But I still love the poker tells part of it. I still love the correlating behaviors and what they've done in the past. And I love all of that on top of the strategy still. And whether that helps me win a little bit more, maybe, but it's a lot of fun to still do.
I can take it from somebody that's lost plenty of money.
Then we need to play with it. That's what we need to do.
Yeah, right. I'm never playing with you.
Yeah.
So you are you're not near the end of your career for sure in leadership, but you're definitely heavy into it. What are some of the things you're looking forward to in the next stage of your life as a career? Because I mean, frankly, you've learned, and you're never going to be perfect, but I think that you've learned enough to maybe be better.
Yeah.
In the future, what are some of the things you're looking forward to in that next stage of your career?
So I think both things. I think I kind of paused my PD for a while, my professional development, and when I first came in my current role, I was here for 5 years before I ever went to a conference, and I paused that for a while. And now that I'm trying to attend conferences every year, I'm on an accreditation group that goes out and visits other schools and sees how they do things. That's fascinating to me, learn how other schools do practices and how do they solve the same challenges we have. I love that part of it. But I'm excited I think I'm at the stage where I think I do a little bit can help other people develop into their careers and see how successful they can become. I think that's a fun part of it. But I have a lot of goals that I'd still like to accomplish, and particularly for the people I work with. We're lucky to be in an industry of education that we're passionate about. It's fun to work with those people and make sure that we're making a difference in their lives. So it's not lack of motivation by any means. It's still fun to do every day that way.
Yeah, especially when you see the impact. And I should have probably mentioned this earlier, but you're in higher education. Yeah. And so that's the field. Although a lot of the lessons you've talked about, I think, are applicable to industry, corporation, Fortune 500s, because I think a lot of those challenges are pretty standard across any industry. So if you had to think of where you want to end up in your career, do you have an aspiration, or is that something you don't think about a whole lot?
No, I do, and thinking about next steps and stuff and what that might be, and other leadership positions that might come open, but I don't necessarily have like a final goal in mind or anything. You'd love to be a place where you're making the most impact you can, and if you're not able to make decisions that you think would be healthy for an organization or healthy for students or good or positive for the people you work with, that's frustrating at times. And so you want to be in a situation where you're having the most impact on the most people. And I think it's the same way you approach things, is you just want to make sure that your time's well spent and that your skill set's being used the best that it can be. And that's what I'd be most excited about. To say it's a certain position or a certain place, I don't have that in mind. I just want to make the most impact that I can and really enjoy what I do every day. So.
And I feel like that's the lifelong learner, and people in education usually, but I think in good leaders just trying to continuously evolve and find that right next challenge. Well, Joel, appreciate it. I had a good time. I hope that people find value in some of the lessons you've learned, and hopefully I shared a couple too. I appreciate everything you've done, like for me, because I have learned a lot from you, and I know you don't like that pat in the back, but I'll give you a pat in the back on a podcast, because you have been a mentor to me and have made an impact on my leadership.
I appreciate that, but everyone should know that I learned just as much from you, and I learned more from you most days. And your passion for education and how you work with young people, I think, will come across in this podcast every day. seeing how you interact with students, how you interact with leadership. I learn from you all the time, and I know you've had an incredible set of experiences from your growing up, and I hope you share that more on future podcasts because you've had an incredible life, and I learned a lot by watching you. And I do want to tell one quick story is yesterday a program that Eddie's involved with, a paraeducator program, taking people that are currently working as paraeducators and putting them through our community college and then onto university for a 4-year degree in education so they can become teachers. There's really nothing more noble that you could be working on right now. And the program's been so successful, and you've done such a great job with it. And you've worked with other leadership at the high school to make it all come together. And I was blown away yesterday. We had the Secretary of Education for the United States of America come yesterday just to visit your program in Perry. And what an incredible opportunity to meet him, but also just to have a program that you're involved with, that you're passionate about, get highlighted. And that doesn't happen every day. And so kudos to that, and appreciate that you let me be involved in it as much as I can be. So thank you. Yeah.
Cheers. And,
cheers.
And goes back to your point of like making an impact on people, because that program, you helped on that too, but through all of the challenges that program faced, you saw and people are seeing now the impact it's going to make on not just students' lives, which is awesome, but also on the paraeducators and teachers that are going to succeed.
One thing we got to see yesterday was the students all spoke to the Secretary of Education and the President of DMAC, and they reiterated their passion for being in education and how excited they were, and they used the term passion multiple times. And I remember greeting you afterwards, and I said, that's what we need to do as an organization, is we need to match their passion and what they do. And I reflected on that as I drove home last night, and I realized that what we were seeing out of them and their passion for education and working with people and wanting to go into the field is probably reflective already of your passion for it. And you probably had already influenced them in a way that that's what they were showing up with, is that they've already seen how excited you are for the program, how much you've done to get them in the program, and how much you care about their success. And I've worked with a lot of people over the last 20 years in higher ed, and you're at the top of the list of people that truly care about students and will go to bat for them and do whatever they can for them, and that showed up yesterday, so congrats.
Thank you. Appreciate that. On that note, before this podcast becomes more about me, I appreciate you coming through. Stay tuned for our next podcast. I think there's a lot of value in learning from other people's journey, so here's to the next Roads Taken. Have a good one.
This podcast is brought to you by Infinite Resources, a local staffing agency connecting diverse job candidates and central Iowa companies.